This video is about why all of us, both women and men, would be far better off if women ruled our world. In the whole of recorded history, it has nearly always been men who've been the rulers, to the point that most people think it's normal and cannot imagine what the world would be like if women ruled instead. We not only accept male rule as normal, but we also take for granted the mess the world is in. Our history has been a history of warfare. This has become so commonplace, we take it for granted that countries routinely settle differences between them through extreme violence. We also take for granted the enormous gap between rich and poor. Although things have slightly improved these days compared with the past, the inequality of our societies is still vast, as bankers award themselves million-dollar bonuses, while the common people have to pay for the bankers' mistakes. The reason why we accept all this is because we cannot find a solution to any of these problems through male rule. So why would we think that women could do a far better job of ruling than men? To understand this, we have to look at why men find it so difficult to solve the problems of our world. Many famous men have talked about man's inhumanity to man, and have tried through religions and political systems to find solutions. Although many religions have preached love and compassion, they have totally failed to stop warfare, and often seem to have made the situation worse, leading to religious wars. No patriarchal religion has produced a loving and caring society. Political systems haven't been much better. Communism and socialism, for instance, had the aim of creating equality for all, but completely failed to do this. The only political system that seems to have produced a marked difference for the better has been democracy, mostly because it allows people to ditch an unpopular government by voting them out of office, instead of having a violent revolution to do this. So why is it that men, in 5,000 years of recorded history, have failed to solve fundamental problems like warfare and inequality? The root cause of this is men's basic instincts. Most male animals have a powerful competitive urge. They fight other males for access to females. This is why many male animals battle with each other every spring to sort out who has the right to mate with the females. Evolutionists tell us that this is a good thing because the strongest males get to pass on their genes to the next generation. It ensures that the species remains strong and vigorous. This might be fine for other animals, but it becomes a disaster when men, with the same competitive instincts, slug it out using devastating modern weapons. It's easy to see that men often behave like other rutting males from the animal kingdom. Take jousting, for example. Back in medieval times, it was a popular sport involving two horse riders who charged at each other with long lances. This isn't very different from the way stags, bulls, and rams with big horns charge each other every spring. Nowadays, we can see similar behaviour in a rugby scrum or American football scrimmage, where players push against each other to see who is the strongest. It's also true of other sports. There's very little difference between the way male kangaroos box each other and the way men fight in a boxing ring. This sort of behaviour may be reasonably harmless in sport, but it's a different matter when men's competitive instinct is used in wars, where men fight each other with spears, swords, rifles, machine guns, flamethrowers, aircraft, rockets, and even nuclear weapons. No wonder men find it so hard to abandon warfare. Their basic instincts drive them to compete with other men, to see who is the strongest. How dangerous this can be was shown in the Cold War between the USA and the USSR. Both sides raced to produce more and more powerful nuclear weapons and rockets, and eventually deployed enough nuclear weapons to destroy civilization many times over. From the early 1950s to the end of the 80s, people all over the world lived in fear of men committing global suicide through nuclear warfare. Although this is not such a great threat now, it's still with us. The spread of nuclear weapons technology and the nightmare scenario of nuclear weapons getting into the hands of an insane dictator or a terrorist group still remains. The competitive instinct also makes it impossible for men to create an equal society. When stags fight each other for access to females, the end result is that the winner takes it all. The strongest stag has no intention of sharing the females of his harem with any of the weaker stags. Exactly the same thing happens in human society. In the past, kings and lords grabbed vast wealth for themselves, while the ordinary people were poor peasants, serfs, or even slaves. It's true that today things have improved, but even in democratic countries, there is still an immense gap between rich and poor. All of this means that while men continue to rule the world, they will also continue to compete with each other for power and wealth, creating highly unequal societies and devastating wars. Modern technology is still being used to create more and more deadly weapons with which to kill people. Clearly, men are doing a terrible job ruling our world, so why would we think women would do it better? To answer this, we need to go back to women's basic instincts. After the stags had fought each other and the strongest had fertilized the females, it was then the female's job to allow the fetus to grow inside her body. When her fawn was born, she cared for it until it was developed enough to look after itself. The reason why female mammals do this is because of a powerful maternal instinct, which drives most of them to devote their lives to caring for their young. It has to be like this, because without a powerful nurturing instinct, the species would quickly become extinct. The human female also has a very powerful maternal instinct, because the human child takes far longer to reach maturity than most other animals. An animal like a deer can reach full maturity in 5 years, but for a human it can take up to 20 years, so the commitment of a human mother to her child has to be stronger than in most other animals. As we can see with patriarchal, male-dominated governments, it is men's fierce competitive instinct that dictates how men behave when they rule. In matriarchal, female-dominated governments, it will be women's nurturing instincts that will determine how a female government will behave. Because of women's maternal instincts, the main focus of any matriarchal government will be children. No female-dominated government will want to see any child in the country they rule live in poverty and ignorance. They will devote more of the resources of the country into caring for children than any patriarchal government, which means maternal care and education will take priority over other aspects of government spending. It's women who tend to dominate the caring professions. They are the nurses and doctors, carers of the elderly, teachers, playgroup leaders, and social workers. This is because women's maternal instincts are so strong that they not only care for their own children, but also other people's children, the sick, the elderly, and animals. While in patriarchal countries the caring professions are starved of money, and many female carers are underpaid and overworked, in a matriarchal country, many more resources will go to the caring professions. A female-dominated government will use its power to create a far more compassionate and nurturing society. This will also lead to a much more equal society. If more resources are put into educating and caring for all children, the poor will have the same opportunities and develop the same sense of self-worth as children from rich families. This will inevitably reduce crime. It's an open secret that poverty is the main cause of crime. A person with a well-paid job and respected social standing is far less likely to commit crime than a person with a poorly paid job or who is unemployed and unskilled. Countries with the highest crime rates tend to have a large gap between rich and poor. The quickest way to overcome this is to eliminate relative poverty. A nurturing matriarchal government is far more likely to do this than a competitive patriarchal government. It has to be admitted that it is men who commit most crime, largely because they are more aggressive, violent, and selfish than women are. These traits can be made worse by the macho image that patriarchal societies tend to foist on men. The heroes in books, comics, TV, films, and video games for boys are very violent men. In most stories, the hero becomes the winner by being better than the villain at using a weapon or his fists. The message is that violence is the solution to all problems, and these aggressive heroes become a boy's role models. A matriarchal government will think it crazy to use the media to encourage young men to be violent, and look for more constructive ways to entertain boys. They will seek to create more caring and responsible males as role models for boys and young men. Matriarchy can also solve the population explosion. During the last 100 years, we have suffered a steep rise in our populations. The world now contains nearly 7 billion people. What is striking about this increase is that it mostly occurs in poorer countries. In richer Western countries, the population is largely stable, with the numbers only growing through immigration from poorer countries. So why is the population jumping in poorer third world countries? One reason is that some follow religions like Roman Catholicism or Islam, which discourage birth control. Women are often barred from education and told that their only function is to breed. It can also be because of a lack of social services. In the West, when people become too old to work, they receive a pension and can be cared for in retirement homes if they become ill or too frail to look after themselves. But in countries without such a system, the elderly depend on their children to care for them. So families in poorer countries, sometimes with high infant mortality rates, feel they need to have many children to ensure they're looked after in their old age. Matriarchal governments will change this, because more resources will be allocated to social care and the education and empowerment of women, instead of the grandiose palaces and armies chosen by men. A population which feels secure and valued will not feel the need to have large numbers of children. A matriarchal government will also have a very different attitude towards warfare. Although it would probably be their natural instinct to eliminate the military altogether, women leaders will be realistic enough to know that to do so would leave their country open to invasion or bullying by patriarchal countries with military power. So they will be forced to retain their military strength while there are still patriarchal countries on the planet. The big difference will be that a female-led government will never actively seek conflict in the same way male-dominated countries do. They are far more likely to discuss their differences with other countries than go to war with them. However, complete disarmament will only be possible if every country in the world becomes matriarchal and women truly rule the world. To sum up, all people, both men and women, would be far better off if our world was ruled by caring and nurturing people rather than, as now, competitive and aggressive ones. This raises the question, how can women gain power in order to rule our world? After all, men are physically bigger and stronger than women, as well as being more competitive, aggressive and violent. How can women overcome these disadvantages when competing with men for power? How women can gain political power, despite the fact that they are far less ruthless and ambitious than men, and what they might do with that power to benefit the world. First, we have to look at the question of whether it's inevitable that men will always be the dominant sex. Stephen Goldberg argues powerfully for this in his book, The Inevitability of Patriarchy. His reasoning largely focuses on hormones. Men naturally have more testosterone than women. This hormone not only makes men physically stronger than women, but also makes them more aggressive and competitive. Goldberg claims this competitive behaviour will always make men strive harder than most women to gain the high status roles available in any society. He concludes that men will always outnumber women in most positions of power. To be fair, this is the situation in our world today, and has always been the case throughout recorded history. The depressing aspect of this thesis is that it indirectly suggests that the most aggressive and competitive people will always rule our societies. There is no way out. War will remain the normal way to settle disputes between countries. Throughout history, many leaders have thought nothing of invading other countries, and if successful, they are celebrated as great leaders. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan and Napoleon are well-known examples. The fact that these great men have caused the deaths of millions of people doesn't seem to be a problem. We live in a world that worships winners. Had Hitler won the Second World War, he would now be considered a great leader simply because his supporters will be the ones writing history. War and empire building is seen as so normal that only a minority of people seem to question its insanity. Nor do we seem to notice very much that we live in an unfair world where, according to the World Bank, over 1 billion people live in conditions of extreme poverty, and where there are between 15 to 20 million starvation-related deaths every year. This is justified because we live in a competitive world of winners and losers. It's okay to ignore those who live in dire poverty or starve to death, because after all they are only losers and somehow deserve their fate. Stephen Goldberg may well be right in his views. He explains very clearly why the world is like it is and offers no alternatives. But human beings are supposed to be intelligent animals and not completely controlled by their basic instincts. If we were to use our intellect to think things through, we would have to ask the question, Do we truly want to live in a competitive world of conflict, war and poverty? If the answer is no, then we need to consider how we can change our world for the better. Although men have created a world dominated by conflict, many thinkers have been dissatisfied with this. Many different religious and political systems have been tried in the quest for a fairer, less violent world. Most of these schemes have failed, except perhaps for democracy. The reason for its success is that an unpopular government can be voted out of power rather than being overthrown through violent revolution. If we look at the past, bloody revolutions generally fail to bring about better government because the successful leaders of such a revolution are almost always men of violence. The military skills needed to defeat the government's army are not the skills you need to successfully rule a country. Democracy at least gives countries a chance of being ruled by peaceful men. It also allows women to achieve positions of power. Since the early part of the 20th century, women living in democratic countries have had the vote, and a small minority have even entered government. There they found themselves joining a boys' club where they have to play the political game by boys' rules. Competition, aggression, and ruthless backstabbing is the norm. Back in the 19th century, when the suffragettes were campaigning for the vote, men told them it was unreasonable to allow women to have political power because they are too emotional, sentimental, and weak to make the tough, sensible decisions men can. If we look at the male leaders of the 20th century, we can see that they have made many hard choices, but it's arguable whether these choices were entirely rational. 2 world wars, the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by nuclear bombs, and the terrifying threat of nuclear war hardly comes into the category of sensible. The criticism of female politicians as too weak and indecisive existed right through the 20th century. To a certain extent, this was disproved between 1979 and 1990, when Margaret Thatcher was the first British female Prime Minister. She was called the Iron Lady, largely because she was even more ruthless and Machiavellian than most male politicians. She showed that if a female politician wanted to be a success within a patriarchal political party, she had to act, think, and behave like a man. If she had shown herself to be a nurturing and compassionate woman, then she would have lost respect and soon been ousted from power. It seems that in order to be successful politically, women have to eradicate what is seen by men as weakness, but is in actual fact their strength, their care and concern for others. Politicians are not popular with the general public. In many democratic countries, it's hard to get people to exercise their right to vote. The reason for this is, as one cynic pointed out, it doesn't matter who you vote for, you still end up with a politician. As a result, many people choose politicians not because they believe they will do any good, but perhaps because they will do the least harm. They have little faith that politicians can create a better world for us all. We keep on voting for male politicians because we seem to have no other choice. And anyway, few people think that voting for female politicians is any better. They seem just as bad as the males because they act very much like men. Having suffered under the macho rule of Margaret Thatcher for 11 years, Britain lost its appetite for female leaders and has shown no desire to repeat the experiment. It went back to white middle-aged men in suits and breathed a sigh of relief. Female politicians throw away a big advantage when they behave like men. Male politicians can't promise to make our world a better place and overcome problems like war and poverty, because they've clearly failed to do this time and time again. All they can deliver is more of the same, whereas females, if they created a matriarchal political party, could give us a far better future. Within such a party, they can behave like nurturing women instead of substitute males. There are two ways this can be achieved. Women can either take control of existing political parties and turn them into matriarchal ones, or they can start their own party. Both options are difficult, but not impossible. Some countries already have a high proportion of females in government and are used to being led by women. This can spread to other countries if women are encouraged and supported into politics by a female-friendly political system. It's a big step, but we could do it if we chose to. The advantage for women of starting their own matriarchal political party is that they won't have to compete with patriarchal men for power within their own organisation. They can relax and be true to their own nature. To begin with, they will probably not be very successful. The propaganda that says women are too soft and kind to be good leaders is deep-rooted in society, despite notable exceptions. For a matriarchal political party to achieve power, the voting public has to be educated into seeing that A, men have made a mess of the world, and B, women will do it better. It may take a long time to do this, because people fear change. They are still looking for a strong, decisive man who will make all their problems go away, even though they know that such a demigod doesn't exist and never will. Matriarchal women will also have to convince the public that they will behave in a responsible way once they are in power. They will need to explain that changes will be made slowly and carefully. If and when they do achieve power, they must avoid alienating any sections of society, concentrate on being very good administrators, and gently turn the country from patriarchy to matriarchy over a long period of time. A great deal of patience is required. Surprisingly, a matriarchal political party will not just attract female voters. Many men will vote for it as well, while there will be women who oppose it. This is because patriarchal and matriarchal attitudes are found in both sexes. Some of the strongest supporters of patriarchy are women, and yet many more men than women advocate matriarchy. Why would that be? Surely men want to be ruled by their own sex and have a chance at power themselves. It's true for many men, of course, but there are millions who hate the fact that we live in a hierarchical society, where you have to claw your way to the top by standing on the heads of your competitors, then watch your back for the rest of your life as younger men come up behind you to steal your throne. Only a few men are winners. Most find themselves bullied and ordered around by other men who have no interest in their welfare. The prospect of being governed by women who actually care what happens to people can be very attractive. A number of women who are opposed to matriarchy are feminists who believe in sexual equality. Although they think it's wrong for men to dominate women and rule the world, they claim it will be equally wrong for women to do the same. There's a problem with this. In a government or political party where there are roughly the same numbers of men and women, there is nothing to stop men competing fiercely with women for power. As we know, they are very good at this. In this situation, women have the choice of allowing men to appropriate the most important jobs in government, or becoming as competitive and ruthless as men, like many of today's female politicians. Women cannot dominate the world in the same way men have done. Historically, men have ruled countries through force and violence, and used their male armies to conquer other countries. Women have never done this. At no time in history has an army of Amazon warriors sought to conquer the world. There has been no female Hitler. It is equally unlikely that a matriarchal government will rule as a dictatorship and retain power by using an army of young men who kill or torture anyone who opposes the government's rule. Most women are too caring and empathetic to follow such a course. So matriarchal women would find it impossible to impose their rule by violence and intimidation, as men often do. They can only succeed by democratic means. If the people are dissatisfied with their rule, they can be voted out of power. This means a matriarchal political party has to prove to the public that it can govern a country better than male-dominated ones. Considering men's record in ruling our world, this may not be too difficult. Although women find it hard to be as competitive and ruthless as men find it equally tough to be nurturing and caring. Once the public experience a maternal and compassionate matriarchal government, many of them will become very reluctant to go back to being ruled by selfish, ambitious males. It has to be admitted that not all governments are democratic. Some countries are ruled by dictators in one form or another. Some are hardly ruled at all and are the battleground for violent warlords. How can these countries become matriarchal? We believe that once we have even one successful matriarchal government, knowledge of this will seep out to patriarchal dictatorships. In the past, oppressive governments could easily control the media in their countries, but the growth of the internet has made this almost impossible. The people in these countries will see the huge contrast between how they are living and how it is in a matriarchal country, and will begin to demand the same for themselves. A patriarchal dictatorship can only respond to public unrest with even greater oppression, which fans the flame of desire for change and often leads to bloody civil war. Usually this only means swapping one set of violent men for another lot who are just as bad, but if the reason for the upheaval is the desire for matriarchal government, it can be a different story. The new leaders can renege on their promises and move to patriarchal business as usual, but if the desire for real change is strong enough, more revolutions will follow until that change happens. The presence of just a few matriarchal governments can begin to destabilize all patriarchal governments on the planet, just as the desire for democracy has slowly spread to countries oppressed by violent, repressive rulers. Eventually, and this may take a long, long time, we will come to see that being governed by intelligent, compassionate, and nurturing women is a whole lot more sensible than letting men carry on creating havoc and suffering to feed their selfish need for power and status. It's a no-brainer, really. Is a better world possible? Today, the world is suffering from a major financial crisis that could be worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s. As a result, people all over the world are protesting. Their main focus is the fact that even though jobs and wages are being cut for ordinary people, the rich are becoming more and more wealthy. In a time of great austerity, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Those who caused the crisis, seen as bankers and financial organisations, are perceived as having been left untouched by hardship. For this reason, many people are very angry indeed. Activists in America are calling for extreme measures, a kind of French Revolution, in which the bankers and financiers will be guillotined. Although the anger people feel about the way bankers might be cheating the rest of us is very understandable, we need to learn the lessons of the French Revolution, why it didn't work out, and why it went horribly wrong. It's a little-known fact that women played a very important role at the beginning of the French Revolution, but then allowed men to take over the leadership. The new revolutionary leaders proved to be as bad, if not worse, than the people they replaced. They began by guillotining the aristocratic class, but it didn't stop there. The male leaders fought savagely for power, and the losers of this struggle were also guillotined. Under the rule of the dictator Robespierre, tens of thousands of people were executed in a reign of terror. Ironically, France was now being ruled even more repressively and violently than before the revolution. In some regions, the people rose up and defied the revolutionary government, but were suppressed using brutal force. In the end, the country became a military dictatorship headed by Napoleon Bonaparte, who embarked on a long war to try to conquer the whole of Europe. Millions died. The lesson of the French Revolution is clear. The problem is patriarchy. It doesn't matter whether you replace one group of male leaders with another, you will still end up with conflict, war, and an unequal society. The Wall Street protesters point out that only 1% of the population owns nearly half of the wealth of the USA. This is not unusual. 5,000 years ago, in ancient Egypt, the pharaoh and the ruling class also owned the vast bulk of the wealth of Egypt. Such inequity has been true throughout history in every country in the world. At times, ordinary people have risen in rebellion against such manifest injustice. There have been scores of peasant revolutions over the last 2,000 years, most of them brutally suppressed. But even the uprisings that have been successful haven't made life better for the ordinary person. We only have to look at the French and Russian revolutions to see that the oppression of the common people became even worse. Even recently in Egypt, where a popular uprising caused the fall of the government, it still hasn't produced a better life for the people, and may never do so. Over the years, people have tried many different political systems, like communism, socialism, theocracy, fascism, and democracy. It's true that some systems have been better than others, but all have created unfair societies where there is usually a big gap between rich and poor. Even in our present unstable world, where large numbers of people are angry enough to revolt against injustice, there is no guarantee that the new rulers will be any better than the ones they replace. They might even be worse. So why is it that every political system man has tried has failed to create a reasonable, equal and fair society? It's because men are very competitive in nature. It's completely impossible for those who fight each other for power and wealth to create a fair and equal society. It's not going to happen. We only have to look at communism to see the truth of this. The avowed aim of this political system was to create equality, yet all communist revolutions have led to dictatorship. Does this mean that people's desire for a more equal and fairer society will never be achieved? We have tried every political system, and none of them has brought equality, apart from one. We have never tried matriarchy. We have never seen what it might be like if we were governed by women. In the 5,000 years of recorded history, it has largely been men who have ruled our world, It's still true today. Although we are seeing more female politicians, presidents and prime ministers, they are still a small minority. These women have to join patriarchal political parties and rule using the patriarchal system. The result is that they have to act like men if they want to be a success in a male-dominated world. What women need is a matriarchal political party, which allows them to act and behave like women instead of substitute males. So what, you might say, if we had a matriarchal political party ruling a country, what difference would it make? The difference is that women are less competitive than men. A woman's body produces far less testosterone than a male one. This makes the average woman not only physically weaker than a man, but less aggressive as well. It's the reason why men have ruled our world for the last 5,000 years. Fighting for power, wealth and status comes naturally to many men, and when this is coupled with a lack of compassion for the suffering of others, it's a recipe for the worst excesses of tyranny and cruelty. In a patriarchal world, where the dice is loaded in favour of competitive and aggressive men, most women have no chance of having their voice heard, even less chance of gaining power unless they inherit it. Even then they may be married off to an ambitious male and shunted off to the sidelines. It's not much fun for most men either. If they lose out in the dog-eat-dog world of patriarchy, then they are seen as failures and are used to further the ambitions of the alpha male winners. It would be different if we had a matriarchal political party. Voters could choose female politicians whose desire is to see a fairer and more balanced society. They would be far less likely to take a country to war, far more likely to see inequities and seek to remove them. No, women are not perfect, but they are far more likely to make decisions which benefit the whole of a society and far less likely to favour the rich and powerful at the expense of everyone else. There are good reasons why this would be the case. Women's maternal instinct and their ability to act unselfishly, which springs directly from it. Most women care deeply about their children's welfare. Many care about children in general, and some care for everyone. It's no accident that the most vulnerable people in our society are largely looked after by women, while men generally pursue money, status and power. So the focus for any matriarchal government will be on children, and those who, like children, cannot fend for themselves in a competitive world. A matriarchal government will spend more of the resources of a country on the welfare of children than any patriarchal government. No matriarchal government will want to see children live in poverty and ignorance. In the process of helping children, the government will also have to help the parents who are caring for the children live a life which allows them to nurture their young. Eventually, the resources of the country will be devoted to caring for all people in ways that our military-industrial nations cannot contemplate and would reject outright. Where does business fit into this stream? Where are the large armies to defend us from aggressive countries? Where would the money come from to nurture all children and help them realise their potential? If we shared out the wealth of a country more equitably, wouldn't successful entrepreneurs simply jump ship and go to where they could keep more of their money? Sensible questions, given the world as it is today, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Not all people who set up in business are greedy, selfish people whose only interest is in making money. Some care for their employees and for the society they live in. This can be reinforced by the political decisions made by matriarchal governments. Laws do not have to favour the rich and powerful. It's not inevitable. although we have reached a state of such disillusionment and despair that it seems that way. People living under tyrannical governments often believe that nothing will ever change. Dissidents will always be thrown into prison and tortured. The dictator will always be free to squander the wealth of the country on palaces and guns, while the poor starve. Then the revolution comes and a chance to overthrow the corrupt regime arrives. We are in exactly the same position globally. The tyranny of patriarchal power and greed has brought us to our knees. What we need this time is a revolution which empowers women instead of replacing selfish and competitive men with another bunch who are just the same. We can change the world and make it a fairer and more loving place to live if we allow women to lead us.